Indigenous peoples are found in some 90 countries worldwide. The United Nations estimates our population at 370 million, occupying 20% of the Earth's territory. Our territories are rich in biodiversity, and we are known as the stewards of most of the remaining natural resources on Earth. This is attributed to our symbiotic relationship with nature and the environment, one of nurture for survival and immediate needs, and for the use and enjoyment of our future generations. Our spiritual, cultural, social, and economic life is intrinsically linked with our ancestral lands, territories, and natural resources. Yet we belong to the poorest of the poor. A study conducted by IFAD in 2007 reveals that while they constitute approximately 5% of the world's population, Indigenous peoples make up 15% of the world's poor. They also make up about one-third of the world's 900 million extremely poor people. We share a common history of colonization, subjugation, and neo-colonialism, capitalist and imperialist plunder of our natural resources and territories, discrimination, displacement, ethnocide, and genocide. We share common problems and struggles. Development aggression refers to logging, mining, dams, plantations, and other resource extractive or infrastructure projects that massively affect Indigenous peoples' lives and territories. Aside from massive dislocation and detrimental effects on our symbiotic relationship with the environment, our participation and interests are usually neglected. In most cases, development projects are forcibly implemented in our territories, and militarization is usually resorted to by governments and capitalist interests pushing for such projects. Development aggression continues to be a major issue among Indigenous peoples up to the present.
Indigenous people are not been part of the in the decision-making process right from the very beginning, and because Indigenous peoples are not informed, are not involved in the decision-making process. So there is a serious issue with the denial of the Indigenous people's right to free, prior, and informed consent. And because of that, when they push through, it has led to a division among the Indigenous peoples.
The dominant development paradigm at present also results in the further marginalization, impoverishment, discrimination, government neglect, exploitation, and oppression of Indigenous peoples. Our self-determined and sustainable development is undermined. The environment with which we depend on for our survival is being destroyed, and its ethnocidal effects threaten our very existence as Indigenous peoples. Hence, we resist this development paradigm. Development has to be self-determined and sustainable in order to truly address our development needs without compromising our natural resources. Self-determined and sustainable development for Indigenous peoples is based on the principles of people's participation, self-reliance, social justice, gender equality, integration with ecosystems, and human rights-based approach to development. Self-determined and sustainable development is consistent with our assertion of our collective rights on lands and resources for the benefit of all, and for nurture of such land and resources for present and for future generations. This addresses Indigenous people's long-term well-being and is integrated with the ecosystems that support our survival. Indigenous peoples can contribute to development effectiveness as we aspire for self-determined and sustainable development.
2010, the International Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation, or IPMSDL, was formed. IPMSDL aims to strengthen the solidarity and movement of indigenous peoples worldwide, to fight for the recognition and respect of all inherent rights as indigenous peoples to land, life, self-determination, self-determined and sustainable development, and for human rights. In an effort to reach out to grassroots indigenous peoples from different parts of the world for wider information sharing and education on aid and development effectiveness, the IPMSDL, together with other indigenous peoples organizations and the CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness, conducted a global indigenous peoples activity on aid and development effectiveness in 2013. The activity serves as venue for indigenous peoples from different parts of the world to learn and exchange views about the current global context and processes on aid and development effectiveness, on the importance of indigenous peoples' engagement in such processes and discourses, and continuing our assertion for self-determined sustainable development framework in the current aid and development agenda. We shall continue empowering ourselves towards the attainment of our self-determination as indigenous people. We shall persevere in strengthening our organizations and movements for genuine development. Development funds should support self-determined and sustainable development for indigenous peoples and other sectors of society. Nothing about us should be discussed and decided upon by any state, multilateral agency, a donor, or corporation without us. Indigenous peoples must be part of any policy or decision pertaining to our development. This means genuine recognition and respect for our right to free, prior, and informed consent, our right to self-determination, and other inherent rights of indigenous peoples, as enshrined in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, International Labour Organization Convention 169, and other international agreements and policies pertaining to indigenous peoples and human rights. We demand for a stop to development aggression in the indigenous peoples' territories. We demand that states, corporations, and other development stakeholders respect the rights of indigenous peoples.
It is about time to build a higher solidarity among indigenous peoples worldwide, based on a deeper appreciation that imperialism and neoliberal globalization is at the root of our common problem.
Sidong ilay sina idumay Nangdong ay sidong ilay sina idumay Sa lidumay ay diway.
Let us unite as an international indigenous peoples movement for self-determination and liberation as we strive to build a better world beyond the neoliberal capitalist model.
As people united will never be defeated. Long live international solidarity.
Nangdong ay sidong ilay sina